So Slaghammer has returned to the nest. Her first round of test and tune sessions are done, and the results, so far so good. So let's recap. We originally set this car up to run on Power Tour. It went on Power Tour. Everything was groovy with that. Now we changed the converter and the gears, and time to get it working on the drag strip. So now my unstated goal with this project, because I have learned better than to state goals on YouTube, right? Everybody wants it done in immediate results. Get it done, get it done, get it done. Stuff takes time. You work through things. My unstated goal with this car, with this combination, was to get it to run in the 750 range. So it could go out and participate in 750 index races, which is a common thing in 8th mile racing. Be able to hit nostalgia races and gasser events and so on and so forth. And remain period correct. So everything on this car is period correct, 1970, 1971, 1972, right? So, and on a budget. Now this motor here is built entirely out of used, mostly stock parts. I think the only new stuff in this whole engine is one piston, because we had a bad piston, one piston, the rings, the bearings, gaskets, everything else is used. Everything else is hand-me-down and swap meet and just junk, okay? We have someplace between like 1,800 and 2,000 bucks in the entire motor. So give me an idea what we're working with here. So the stated goal was to get this, the unstated goal was to get this thing into the 750 range. So far, the car has run a consistent 820s. That seems to be its number. And its best run was an 812. Now that sounds like it's light years away from 750, right? Until you take into consideration that the car ran an 812 with a 2-second 60 foot, right? It is absolutely dead on the starting line. We changed the converter. It's got a 4,500 RPM converter in here, and it's got 430 gears. But the motor isn't making enough power on the hit to work the converter. So it just oozes out of the starting line. Now, where does it make power? 75 to 100 feet out. On one of the car's first runs at Buffalo Valley, it left the starting line like just it oozed off the starting line, right? And then it got out 100 feet, 75 to 100 feet, and broke traction, because that's the point where the vacuum secondaries decided to flop open on this thing. All right, so now Al's out making runs with this car, made changes on the secondary springs, went from the heavy black spring to the yellows or the white, whichever one it was. Went to the lighter spring, and it didn't really help. It didn't really help get the secondaries open any sooner. Not sure why exactly. Andy Wood from Unity Motorsports helped Al at one of these sessions. Actually, there were a couple of physical problems with the carburetor. So the back carburetor had a bad needle and seat, so it was dumping fuel. So Andy took care of this. He played with the secondary diaphragms, and then while doing all of this, the fuel line here split. So this had a metal line that went from here to here. And one of the things we've got going on with this car is the grump lump scoop is narrow, and this right here, you see this area, this is where the fuel line the hood was always rubbing against the fuel line, so it finally broke the line. So I just made this quick repair over here. I'm gonna fabricate a nice metal line for it that'll be a little bit better out of the way. So now there are a couple of things with this car you have to understand. It's really not a race car. It's going to be a bracket car, and there's no street outlaws here, right? No street outlaws here. So sticking with that grump lump hood, the scoop, and keeping things the way they are, this style carburetor, this style panorama, that's cast in granite. That's not going to change. So we have to work within those limitations. So they played around with the carburetors, but still could not get the car to react, to get the secondaries to open soon enough to work the converter. So okay. This is not a new problem. This is actually it's a new problem. It's a new situation, a tuning situation for us. But in general, it's not a new problem at all. If you go back to the early 1970s when a tunnel ram was first really adopted for widespread use, everybody had this problem. This is not a new problem. What Holley did was it came up with what they called a center squirter carburetor. So here's how this works. All of these manifolds, these earlier tunnel rams, are set up for this style carburetor. Okay, not the 4150. The 4150 is the one with the center hung float bowls, and mechanical secondary ones have an accelerator pump on the secondary side. Now, because these are vacuum secondary carburetors, you can't have an accelerator pump back there. You've only got the one. And this is the limitation. If you want to put, let's say, a 4150 style carburetor on this, you have to turn them sideways. Now, for us, the mechanical secondary 4150 carburetor is not an option. Why? Because of this space limitation. The carburetor literally will not fit in this opening here. So we're limited to this style carburetor. The 660 center squirters, which are mechanical secondary but will fit that manifold with the carburetor spacing, those things are, they go for like $600, $800 on up. I'm not spending $1,200, $1,400 on a pair of carburetors to put on an $1,800 engine. It's just not going to happen. It goes against the whole like concept here of building with cheap stuff, with budget stuff, getting the most you can out of budget stuff. So that leaves us two choices here. If we're going to stick with our hood and we're going to stick with this intake manifold, our only choices, and not go for the center squirter carburetors. Oh, I don't think I explained the center squirter concept. Okay. So the center squirter carburetor has the same body, the same float bowls, but instead of having a diaphragm for the secondaries, it has a mechanical linkage here that operates the secondaries. And instead of the accelerator pump shooter being here, it has a tower in the center that shoots a stream of accelerator pump at the secondary barrels as well as the primary barrels. That's why they call it a center squirter. And they came in two sizes, the 660 and the 850. So now we have two choices with this, if we're going to stick with this intake manifold and that scoop. We can either get these carburetors to open sooner manually, which is working with a handicap because we don't have an accelerator pump for the secondaries here, or we can switch to a pair of AFB style carburetors, so Edelbrock's, and they'll fit. That whole deal will work. We would have to go to a pair of 750 Edelbrock style carburetors to match the two 600s that we have here. And the 1200 CFM is, judging by the way this thing performs once it's out, like I says, he got out, you watch it on the video, the car gets out, it oozes off the starting line, the secondaries flop open, and it breaks traction. He actually backpedaled at that point and then got back into it. And you watch the car's last run, yeah, and that was another thing too. They had to lock out the timing on this because the timing was set for power tour, so it was set with like an 18 or 20 degree spread, 36 degrees total, but like 16 initial. And it just, again, you got to work the converter. When you hit the throttle for this converter to work, the engine has to come up instantly. So the combination of the vacuum secondaries and the advance in the distributor was a real hindrance. Now with the advance out of the distributor, it's locked out at 36 degrees. The last run that the car made was locked out at 36 degrees. And you can see that it leaves harder, it leaves cleaner, but it never gets on top of the converter. And you watch and you listen as the car goes down the track, it gets out, I'm gonna guesstimate about 75 feet, and then woof, you hear the secondaries open and the car charges out. So this is how you get an 812. This is how you get an 812 with a 2-second 60-foot. An 812, by the way, if you guys keeping track of this at home, an 812 in a quarter mile is like a 1270. It's something. It's going to be right there in that range, right? Like a 1270. So if we can get that 60 foot, if we can knock 3/10, 4/10 off that 60 foot and get it down into the 1617 range, which this thing is fully capable of, we'll have our 750s like it's just right there. The car's consistent. It doesn't do anything weird. It doesn't do anything wrong. The motor makes really good power. You know, do the conversions, you know, yourself. Let's just call it 8.0, right? At 3,400 pounds, you could figure out how much power it's making. So that's our mission now, is to figure out whether we're going to keep going with these carburetors or switch over to a set of Edelbrock style carburetors. Carter, AFB, Edelbrock style carbs. So I'm going to show you what we're going to try next. We're going to send Al out again this coming weekend with it. I'm going to show you what we're going to try now, okay? So the way a vacuum secondary carburetor works is when there's enough of a signal through the primaries, it pulls on this vacuum diaphragm, and the vacuum diaphragm opens the secondaries. This piece of linkage right here is used to shut the carburetors. So the throttle is open, right? The throttle is open. You see that arm move forward. The secondaries open, and this whole thing tilts forward. And then when you close the throttle, this arm here is there to shut the secondaries. So what we're going to do is, and this is like the oldest trick in the book, what we're going to do is we're going to put a small nut and bolt in this slot right here, so that as the throttle is opened, it'll start to drag open the secondaries before the vacuum can actually get to it. This stop that we put in here is going to start opening the secondary barrels. And for right now, for this test session, we're only going to do it to the front carburetor. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave, it's got a yellow spring in the diaphragm. We're going to leave the rear carburetor, because remember now these barrels are way back here. We're going to leave the rear carburetor to work on vacuum alone, and we're going to advance the front carburetor, the secondary barrels of the front carburetor, so they open halfway, 3/4 of the way when the throttle is opened. The way we're going to tune this is that we're going to get it to deliberately bog. So we're going to start it off, and we're going to put our nut and bolt very close to this arm, so that the secondaries will start to open right about there. Now that should give us a bog. If it doesn't give us a bog, then we'll start doing the same thing to the secondary. But this should give us a bog. If we get a bog there, then what we'll do is we'll move our stop down a little bit. We'll move it, let's say, to the halfway position and try it again. So the idea here is to just give the engine as much carburetor as we can without secondary accelerator pumps. Give the motor as much carburetor as we can to get it to hit the converter. It'll hit the converter, it flashed the converter, and that'll actually get the car up and moving. And that should knock the 3/10, 4/10 or so off that 60 foot we need to reach our 750 8th mile goal. Like I said, the power is there. I'm actually God's truth is I'm surprised at how much power this thing makes. The numbers in and of themselves don't tell the whole story. 812 doesn't indicate a ton of power, but 812 with a 2-second 60 foot, that indicates the serious amount. It's making good power. Very happy with this thing. So Al is accustomed to the car now. He's comfortable with it. He's made enough runs with it, so it's everything is kind of getting to be second nature for him. So I think these small tuning advances that we're going to make now, or experiments now, I think this should do the trick. Now, if by some chance it doesn't work, and so if it doesn't get us where we need to be, then what we're going to do is over the winter, because we're running out of year real quick here now. Over the winter, we'll probably switch over to a set of AFB style carburetors, Edelbrock AFB style carburetors. The 1200 CFM potential of this setup, in order to match that 1200 CFM potential, we'll have to go with a pair of, let's say, 750 Edelbrocks to make that work. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start screwing around with this thing. We'll post another video once we have this thing to where I think it's about right. We'll post an update video on the tune on this thing, and then hand this back to Al, send them out to the track, and see what he comes up with. So that's it for now, and I'll see you tomorrow.